Wasn't entrepreneurship supposed to be liberating? Lots of entrepreneurs say entrepreneurship is anything but liberating. They call it indentured servitude. Other entrepreneurs see it as the most incredibly liberating thing on the planet. They couldn't even imagine living any life other than the life of an entrepreneur. I see both camps. I've been in both plenty. When I think about how liberating entrepreneurship can be, I think of a guy named Rob Herzog. Rob was my first boss, and one day he was on his way to work. This is after we had worked together, about 15 years into his career. He's on his way into work after having spent the evening with his mother, who's visiting from out of town. He was up late, and in 15 years, this was the first day in his life he was late to work, ever. Now, as the train's coming into the station, which was at the building that he was going to go up and work in, 9/11 happened. As the plane hit the building, Rob had not yet arrived at work. And suffice it to say, he was shaken to the core. He went down to South America for over half a year to process, to figure out what comes next, what this all meant, and so on. Among other things, he came up with a venture that would eventually be called Zog Sports. And this was an intramural sports league for professionals where a lot of the proceeds would go to philanthropic causes. And these were his passions. He loved sports, he loved people and networking and talking to others. He loved philanthropy. So this wove it all together, and he experienced not just incredible liberation with this, but something called flow. See, flow is a term that was coined by a guy named Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, a psychologist who studied peak performance, optimal performance. And it's when you're involved, peak, this idea of flow, is this peak performance state where you're so involved in an activity, nothing seems to matter. Nothing outside of that activity. You're so intensely concentrating on what you're doing that your attention doesn't go to anything irrelevant or outside of that. Time stands still. 5 hours, 10 hours can pass by and you don't even realize it. You don't know you haven't eaten, you're not hungry. You're so focused. Now, I learned about this thing called flow because I was in a course at business school that was studying optimal human functioning. This state of flow is something that happens when you match your skills to the task that's being asked of you. So you're not actually being asked to do something so outrageous or overwhelming, it provokes massive anxiety, right? You're also not being underwhelmed by something that leaves you idle so easy. You're so well matched that you're fully engaged, right? This is flow. And I learned about it in this course when only about 3 sessions into semester 1, I'm brand new at business school, something strange happened. The professor asked me to step outside of class before the class began. He said, "Josh, something I'd like to discuss with you." I was nervous. I thought I hadn't done anything wrong yet, but here we are talking. He says, "Josh, my mother has fallen ill. It would mean a great deal to me if you would step in the next session and guide the lecture, guide the discussion on a topic, a book called Flow." And I'm sitting there thinking, barely hearing what he's saying, thinking, no way, I am not going to run a class. I am deathly afraid of public speaking. But of course, what I just said was, of course, yeah, absolutely. And so I did it. And I did it only after reading this book called Flow and rereading again and jotting notes and preparing a lecture and then walking around and around talking to myself for days into the wee hours of the night practicing this lecture with people screaming outside their windows. This was Manhattan, by the way, just outside of Harlem. People are screaming from their windows, "Shut up!" I'm just sitting there getting comfortable. I didn't care about them. I was much more afraid of public speaking. But as I was preparing and these ideas burned themselves, etched themselves into my mind, they got to this place where they're so fresh now, because I'm interacting with CEOs constantly, visionaries. And I'm guessing if you're watching this, you're like one of those in our community who is a visionary. And this set of ideas around flow is so central to our existence as visionaries. Why? We undermine our flow so much of the time. See, a visionary is someone that comes up with big ideas, lots of big ideas. We like to get outside the four walls and do R&D, see the big wide world and innovate ideas out there. We like to build big relationships. We're emotional. We get inspired and we tend to inspire others. Now what happens is, as visionaries, we're also at times drawn into a completely different role, something called integrator. Integrator is a very different kind of role. The integrator is very detail-oriented. They cross their T's, dot their I's, they'll peek under the period to see if there's anything hiding underneath. They're the ones who drive accountability throughout the entire organization. The integrator is the one who kind of harmoniously entwines or integrates the different pieces and components of the business. They often put together the numbers and the spreadsheets, the pro formas. Very different mindset, very rational, very logical, linear thinkers. Very different from us as visionaries. Now what happens is, if as visionary, since we're able to do that role, but we don't love it, if we get stuck in that, it drains us emotionally massively. Now, what also happens, because an integrator draws a very different kind of person that thrives in that role. If as visionary, we stay in that role, we not only sabotage ourselves, we sabotage all those people that we're ultimately trying to drive accountability in. Because we don't tend, as visionaries, in our DNA, to make the best managers. We'll often micromanage. And so we just end up undermining all sorts of stuff. If there's one thing I invite you to walk away from this little chat here with, it's going to be an exercise that professor from way back when in business school gave us when we were students. And it was called the ideal job. The exercise is to think of and discover your greatest interests, your passions, and your greatest skills or talents, these natural strengths that can really catapult you forward. And consider your ideal job. How can you cobble together in bits and pieces your interests and your strengths so they create your ideal job? Don't just select a title out there. Your ideal job is not out there. It's not like a multi-select dropdown where you choose option C, right? This is something you create based on your unique dimensions. And if you have questions on this very lofty concept, which is also the most mundane since it affects you day to day, moment to moment in your life. If you have any questions on how to do that, or if you have questions on that integrator role that I mentioned, and I hope that you're not stuck in, beyond $3 million and 10 employees, visionaries need to get out of that integrator role and get into the visionary role where they create their greatest value. If you have any questions on that, or any other strategies or tools my team and I are putting in place with entrepreneurs and their teams to help them break through the series of ceilings they face in scaling up and getting to the next level, click on the link you may see or come visit us at helm.ceo. I'm Josh Klenoff, founder, coming to you from the Helm. Have a fantastic week.